Hello, my name is Ramzi Habre, and I am the Program Coordinator for Civil Society Partnerships at the Project on Middle East Democracy, or POMED. Welcome to the 10th episode of Between the Lines, POMED's author interview series. I am pleased to be joined by Dr. Rima Majed, one of the editors of the new volume, The Lebanon Uprising of 2019, Voices from the Revolution, which was co-edited with Jeffrey Karam and published by Bloomsbury. Welcome, Rima.
Thank you. Thank you, Ramzi, for the invite.
This book is one of the first collections that seek to make sense of Lebanon's October 2019 uprising against the ruling elite and the sectarian neoliberal system in place, and that many Lebanese blame for the current devastating financial and economic crisis. This was a hugely important event because these were the first and the largest non-sectarian mass protests in Lebanon's history. The uprising surprised many, especially the political elite, who never thought that the Lebanese citizens could put aside their political and their sectarian differences and protest against the governing system. The book pulls together experts from political science, sociology, economics, journalism, the arts, and other fields with the objective of giving readers a greater understanding of the protests that erupted on the 17th of October 2019. Let me start by introducing our guest. Dr. Rima Majed is an assistant professor of sociology at the American University of Beirut. Her work focuses on social inequality, social movements, sectarianism, conflict, and violence. We are so pleased to have you with us today, Rima.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And let's jump to the questions. So first of all, I would like to ask you about the title of the book, which is The Lebanon Uprising of 2019, Voices from the Revolution. So why did you choose this title? Were the events of October 2019 both an uprising and a revolution? And why is getting these terms right important to our understanding of what happened back then?
Well, that's a good question. And we, as you can tell, we intentionally used both terminologies in the title. And it's partly to say that terms are only important in how we define them, right? I mean, whether it's a revolution or not, this is a discussion that we've seen a lot with the previous wave of Arab uprisings, the first wave, and a lot of theories about, are these uprisings, are these revolutions, are these neither or both, or so our approach in this book is to move beyond an older definition that we find in the literature of uprisings, of a revolution specifically, that is very much shaped around the revolutions of the 19th and early 20th century, and a definition that is very much also shaped by the French Revolution. And that is what we call consequentialist. So a revolution is a revolution if it succeeds, right? So it's only if you change a regime that you have a revolution. Then what the regime is differs from one author to the other. Is it a political regime? Is it a social change, etc.? What we're trying to say in this book is that, well, first, people called it a thawra, which means a revolution, right? So, the first layer of this is acknowledging that people were defining their acts and thinking of what they were doing in revolutionary terms. And therefore, we don't want to dismiss that. Second is that, the book definitely considers, and the authors in it, that this was a revolutionary uprising or a revolutionary rupture, or what we call a revolutionary situation, right? So there was a moment where there was a real revolutionary potential, where the regime was really cornered. Whether it succeeded or not becomes another story. And the fact that it did not necessarily change the political regime does not make it less of a revolutionary moment. So this is what we wanted to signal with this title that has both terminologies.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask you now about the role of alternative media during the revolution. First of all, what is alternative media in Lebanon, and why was it so crucial during the revolution? And also, what is the status of alternative media nowadays?
Okay, so I think I'm not a big fan of the term alternative media because, you know, it's alternative. I mean, what do we mean by alternative necessarily? If we mean media that is opposed to the governing structures or powers, yeah. So, of course, it played a big role, and especially in a country like Lebanon, where the more traditional media. So, if we're thinking about TV, newspaper, and main radio channels, are controlled by by the same oligarchs or politicians. The alternative media scene has played a crucial role by creating a different voice, inciting in some cases, but also documenting. There's huge archival work that has been done, and here I'm thinking about online newspapers or platforms that many have flourished either before or around the time of the uprising, but also other more grassroots initiatives that all these Facebook pages, Twitter accounts, etc., that have become an important source of information for people, but also an important way of archiving what was happening. And we see such, the work of, for example, Akhbar al-Saha and like moving beyond the political economy and like the structures of the more traditional media, or even, the so-called alternative media, and like archiving from the ground, which I think are all very interesting initiatives and very important ones. Of course, today we are more polarized as a society, and therefore, people follow what they believe in or what is closer to their political stance. So, many people went back to traditional media, while those who are still on the opposition follow more what is called alternative media. But I think we are definitely, especially in terms of newspaper, we are definitely in an age globally, not just in Lebanon, but globally, beyond print newspaper, and online platforms have opened up a whole new world for how we report and how we what we write about and what are the topics that we write about. So we see more progressive discussions about gender, about sexuality, about disability, about topics that are not usually covered in traditional media. And we also see the effect of how this is actually starting to shape the discussion sometimes in traditional media that has to take on some of these topics and is starting to highlight more of the things that are being discussed.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to move to my next question. The book describes the courageous mobilization by protesters, but it also talks a lot about the anti-democracy counter-revolution that happened in Lebanon after the October 2019 uprising. So can you explain a bit about how the counter-revolution worked in Lebanon, and what are the main differences between that and between the counter-revolutions that took place in the Arab countries after the Arab Spring in 2011?
Yes, sure. And the counter-revolution is not just anti-democracy. And I think this is, the important thing to keep in mind here is that Lebanon and Iraq in the second wave, but in the cases of the Arab uprisings, are two countries that do not have a dictatorship, at least, in terms of a political regime. So in this case, we're talking about, there is tyranny, but of different sorts, right? And this is why I coined this term of what I call sectarian neoliberalism, because the counter-revolution in Lebanon took different shapes and came from different places, sometimes from state security apparatus, so the police or the security forces or the army, and this, in terms of repression. It also came from non-state actors, mainly militias, right? Not just the two main Shia parties, but also almost every other main party in the country has deployed their militia in different regions. And the third shape or the third actor in this counter-revolutionary approach is the financial institutions, the banks. So this is a special, if you want, constellation of counter-revolution that came from different places. Of course, the tactics were different. So there was repressive violence, but then there was also there were more subtle techniques or approaches, such as or mechanisms of counter-revolution, such as sectarianization, which in many cases took place not in the protest squares necessarily, but in neighborhoods and workplaces. These parties were able to intimidate, to control, to surveil people in their neighborhoods, and therefore played this counter-revolutionary role there, because clientelism is not only about giving money and jobs, it's also about security. And this is a card that was very clearly played in Lebanon. Then there is co-optation and infiltration. There are many parties who suddenly became revolutionary or against the regime and continue until today to play this, to pull this card. And then there's the accusation of foreign conspiracy, of the usual the counter narrative that we hear. But I think there are two also important tactics that we see in many of the uprisings in Lebanon, definitely. One is attempts at derailing the revolution. And so, for example, many of the arrests of protesters, if we look at the trends, when the arrests increase, people start to protest for the release of the protesters rather than for making any political demand, right? And sometimes the regime uses this to derail the revolutionary track. The other thing is a game of attrition, time, fatigue, right? They play the game of they will get to a point, and this clearly was played not just by the political regime, who definitely played this game. But if you remember Riyad Salameh's famous sentence when he said that they will get used to it, right? So it's this approach. They know that if that would in the game of time, the regime will always win. So they bet on the fatigue, on time passing, on and therefore these were all important tactics that were used in terms of counter-revolution. The banks, by the way, have also used physical violence, unlike what we think. They attacked journalists, they attacked, etc. Now, the difference with other Arab regions, as I said, there's a bigger role for non-state actors in repression. And that's because we're not dictatorships, so it's not centralized. So in these contexts, militias and non-state actors played an important role. In the case of Lebanon, clearly the banks and business owners have also played an important role. And I might say something that is controversial for some, but I also say business owners because in many cases, there was a co-optation for a labor movement emerging by people who are businessmen and who organized and tried to blur the lines between employees and employers, etc. And last but not least, and I think this is a very important detail in comparison with at least the first wave of Arab uprisings, but also maybe Sudan and Algeria had a longer time. Lebanon and Iraq both had a very short-lived revolution because they were met, and Lebanon was met with a series of really word-scale exceptional events: a global pandemic, a financial crisis that is described by the World Bank as the crisis that would keep you up at night, and the port explosion. So these are all three very big events that played a counter-revolutionary role in terms of curtailing the revolutionary path.
Thank you, Rima. I'm going to move to my next question, which is about the failure of the people to create a unified party or a unified movement which hurt their ability to stay mobilized on the street, in addition to what you just talked about, which are like COVID and the explosion of August 2020. So why do you think that the people failed to create such a party or such a movement and unify under it?
I think it was impossible to do that. First, because the uprising or the revolution included within its ranks very contradictory forces that did not have similar interests, but that actually had interests that would go against each other, right? So that's one reason. Second reason is that we did not have big organizations that existed before the start of the uprisings that would have been able to scaffold this big historical moment. And what we see today anyways is that those who were the most pre-organized are the ones who could continue in the longer game until today. I mean, we can discuss later if it's success or not, but at least we're able to survive. The rest, what we witnessed at the beginning is a mushrooming of hundreds, if not thousands, of groups with no clear leadership, with no clear vision, with no clear plan. Many of these groups, even those who have stayed until today, with the exception of the sectarian parties, have no mobilizing power, right? So it's like even those who created political parties, these are parties with no social base, so they don't have any mobilizing power, and this is a losing game in many cases. So I think what was really crucial, and this is what we learned from the rest of the uprisings, not just in the Arab region, but around the world, the lack of organized social forces, and here I'm talking about labor, and I'm talking about neighborhood organizations, is a major obstacle for the emergence of a strong, there's no revolution that will ever have a unified front necessarily. There will always be people who will not agree, but at least some revolutions can have a leadership, right? But this, in the absence of social bases that are organized, which means in the absence of the ability to mobilize the streets, it was impossible for anyone to declare themselves the leadership or to unify. And there were many attempts to create a coalition or try to unify. It always ended up with very long meetings that never ended, and that at the end there was an impossibility to agree because people had very different interests. And within the revolution, you had people who wanted a complete overhaul of the regime. You wanted people who wanted just reform. You had people who were, wanted to keep a sectarian quota, people who did not, etc. So we met on a minimum common denominator, which is we're against this regime without really defining what the regime is. But we surely did not meet on what is the alternative that we want. And I think until today, we don't have that.
Okay, so I'm going to take you back a bit to the end of the Civil War in 1990, which ended without a real reconciliation between the different parties that participated and also among the Lebanese people. But we did see in 2019, after the uprising, that it did create some kind of reconciliation between people from different areas who found themselves together on the streets for the first time, and especially the youth. So do you think that the 2019 uprising could build a basis for future cooperation among the Lebanese people, or was it just like a one-time thing and Lebanese are already going back to their original alignments?
I'll go a step back and just to say that there is sectarianization in Lebanon, but I think the assumption that the Lebanese people are divided, that we're a mosaic of different people that need to meet and discover that we can, live together, is one of the founding myths of Lebanon. And I mean, every time, and not just 2019, 2015, 2011, 2005, 2000, 96, all of the previous waves even during the Civil War, we have plenty of examples of big protests that brought people from different walks of life and different sects and different groups together. So I want to tilt a bit the lens of the question to say that, so not to simplify and say that there's no division in society. Of course, there's division, but this division takes very different shapes, right? It can be sectarian, can be political, it can be regional. Some people just simply did not meet because they live geographically apart, not because they hate each other. And it can also be class. And I think what happened in 2019, to me, what is most interesting is not the cross-sectarian, it's the cross-class mobilization that is not highlighted enough in our discourse, but that I think is the main difference with the previous waves. So, to answer the question, yes, there was a moment where possibilities for building these cross-identitarian and cross-class alliances existed, and some people have built on it. But this will never mean that conflict cannot arise, or that, the idea that we turn the page and that, if you remember during the uprising, there was a slogan of this, the end of the Civil War. A civil war is never, you never slip into a civil war, right? The idea that civil wars are not social explosions. Revolutions are. A revolution is a social explosion. It happens, right? A civil war is a political decision. A civil or a non-civil, any type of war is a political decision. So if the question today is, are we back to a zone of danger? Yes, of course. Because there's heightened polarization. Does it mean that it will essentially lead to a war? No. A war is possible if there's a political decision to go to war, but a war will never happen because people don't like each other, or because people just are different. So unfortunately, yes, we are in a period of heightened tension. If this will be used for politicized into more violence, we will need to see, but this will definitely be a political decision. This is not just, it's not like an increase in the crime rates. Yes, in times of financial crisis, crime rates increase, but political violence is a political decision. And this is where, and I'm saying this because the responsibility is on political parties and political leaders. It's not on society. It's not about, whether as a society the uprising brought us together or did not. Of course, an uprising will bring people together. But the question is, who divides them? It's the other side that is more important to think about, whether a conflict can arise, violent conflict can arise or not.
Exactly. Okay, so Rima, my final question is about the future of the country. So where do you see Lebanon headed, especially that there is no end in sight to the current crisis? And what do you think will be the role of civil society organizations in shaping the future of the country?
It's a heartbreaking question because I don't have anything good to say. I'm pessimistic. I don't think, unfortunately, at least the midterm, but even the long term, I think economically to get out of where we are, it's going to take long decades. And I'm not just talking, of course, some people, technocrats can come in and say, look, if we pump money into the system, if you do whatever, in a few years, we can go back to a certain GDP. But I'm not just talking about these indicators. What happened in the past 3 years is a very systematic destruction of social institutions that are crucial. So we're talking education, we're talking healthcare, we're talking really very vital sectors for any society to flourish, but also the only sectors that historically have kept Lebanon going, right? The whole economy is based on this formula of you offer good education, then you export your youth to work abroad and send you money. Well, we no longer can offer this education, and it will take us long decades to rebuild and go back to where we were. And we saw a huge, brain drain. The professional class, most of it has left the country. The same with nurses, with doctors, with professors. We also see, also there's a huge migration from across all classes, right? So across the whole spectrum. And this is of course dangerous, because this means that we're in this very dark tunnel for a long time. But what is even more dangerous is the clear and complete unwillingness of the ruling class to make any step towards a solution. And this is not just a matter of it being unfortunate or pessimistic. This is criminal, and criminal on all levels. So today, thinking about the role of civil society, we would want, of course, civil society is important, but we should not, we should not think that civil society can play the role of a state, or that can solve these are problems that can only be solved with a state. And requires a political will. The unfortunate side of civil society, or thinking about civil society in Lebanon, is that a big part of it, or the majority of it, is very NGOized, in the sense that it works, and it's a system of single issue, grant-based campaigns without a holistic approach. And this is why I go back to say the real civil society that we need today is not NGOs. What we need is real grassroots movements. We need a labor movement. Can you imagine a country like today where salaries are worth peanuts with the devaluation? Where are the unions? How come people are not defending their rights for a decent living? Well, the unions have been completely co-opted and decimated long ago, and this was a plan. This is not just haphazard. So the state knows very well which type of civil society is a threat to it, and they got rid of it. So if we really want to think of a role for civil society, we need to think of how can we rebuild the civil society organizations that the state wants to decimate. Any organization that does not pose any threat, they will let it flourish. They don't care. You can have as much organizations as you want in the country, and a constitutional democracy like this, it's good, right? Who cares? As long as you don't threaten. The minute you threaten, this is when it becomes problematic. And this is why labor organizations are important, neighborhood organizations are important, because this is where you have the mobilization power. And this is where you can really, pressure. So until we start thinking of civil society in those broader perspectives beyond just the NGO word, I think we are in a very difficult phase for the decades to come. Unfortunately, we're ending on a not very happy note.
Yeah, unfortunately. Thank you, Rima. So I've been here with Rima Majed, co-editor of the new volume, The Lebanon Uprising of 2019, Voices from the Revolution, co-edited with Jeffrey Karam and published by Bloomsbury. Thank you so much, Rima.
Thank you, Ramzi.